and the Western view of how it was perceived, I think sometimes we had to, keep ourselves in check a little bit because our values and assumptions about freedom and liberty and what's available to us as humans is, perhaps there's a different construct. So I tried to, look at what they were doing for what it was and how brave it was, and certainly felt, in thinking back in context of, in comparison to the work that we did in starting our bands and the messages that we were talking about, we never were necessarily concerned with going to jail for how we were, for the things that we were saying. And the fact that they almost knew that they would be put in jail, that they were taking that risk was something that I think, caused me to reflect quite a bit.
Thanks. And yeah, I think that another aspect of this that is so interesting, and Amy, maybe you can speak to this. Amy's done a lot of organizing as a founding member of the Permanent Wave Feminist Collective. So you're sort of bringing the current state of DIY and grassroots feminist organizing and the impact that this had on Pussy Riot, or that Pussy Riot had in that context. So maybe if you could just speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I want to talk in a kind of personal way about my experiences organizing and working with others to organize actions in support of Pussy Riot. I'm a member of Permanent Wave, which is a series of linked feminist collectives that focus on encouraging women to participate and collaborate in activism and the arts. So in the New York City group, we received a message from a member of Pussy Riot's International Legal Defense Team, which is a man who was in communication with Pussy Riot's lawyers. And he reached out to our group and was like, you guys are a feminist collective focusing on women in the arts and punk rock. Can you do something in the United States to support Pussy Riot? So what we thought to do initially was to have benefit shows. We actually, the first benefit show featured Ad Rock from the Beastie Boys, which was a huge deal. It was the most high-profile thing that I've ever done, or that I've ever been involved in. And it definitely was for the group. And so the benefit show for Pussy Riot featuring Ad Rock generated a lot of media attention. It was the first time that the case was mentioned in The Guardian, and the benefit show led to the case of Pussy Riot being mentioned in Rolling Stone and Spin and magazines like this. So it really got a fair amount of media attention. There were other less high-profile benefit shows that we did after, and the Permanent Wave Boston did one. So yeah, it was really interesting. The effect that people seem to, have, the effect that the case had on women my age, where, we heard as a group, Pussy Riot, needs help, and immediately people mobilized to help them. That was really an interesting experience. People felt like this was something we could come together about. After the Pussy Riot case, actually, the concepts that we've been thinking about led to a lot of discussion and introspection among members of the group. I think one of the things that came to our attention was like in what ways this case was similar and different to issues of feminism at home. People, I think, thought it was important, and yeah, as a group we thought it was important to talk about people who are incarcerated in the United States wrongfully. And around the same time that the Pussy Riot case was happening, a transgender woman of color named Cece McDonald was also wrongfully incarcerated. This was a situation in which a transgender woman was defending herself against a hate crime and was imprisoned for murder for 2 years, which is the same length of time that Pussy Riot got. So one of the things that we started thinking about as a group of feminists was like what kinds of issues get major media attention, and when people are incarcerated, what stories of incarceration are played up and which ones are sometimes overlooked. I mean, overall, this was, in a personal way, I think an important moment where a lot of young feminists realized like the importance of race within feminism, the importance of respecting and paying attention to differences that exist in America, and how things don't necessarily translate directly from Russia to America in the same context. So, I mean, after having done something very public as kind of activism that was public with these benefit shows, a lot of feminism that I'm doing now, and I think other members of the group are doing now, has to do with more introspective consciousness raising and discussion, which I think is equally important, that, that there are big moments where people put on public displays, but then there's also a lot of thinking and work that needs to go on if we want to like move feminism forward. I think like one of the things that you could see as a weakness of punk rock feminism as it's been viewed by our society, or as people tend to think of it, is that people see punk rock feminism as like something that focuses on the experiences of white women. And I think that needs to change if we are going to continue to work with punk rock feminism, and if it's going to be a useful or valuable thing to work with here in America in the future.
Yeah. And you brought up a ton of good points there, but I want to sort of zero in on one that you mentioned a while ago that, I think something that we saw reported on in this case too is that there was such a disparity between the way that this case was perceived in the West and the way that a lot of, like you mentioned, Ad Rock, for example, coming out and vocalizing his support. There were so many celebrities in American culture and in Western culture who were, Madonna wrote Free Pussy Riot on her back at a concert, and that was a very iconic image here, but that was so different from the way that this case was perceived in Russia. So, there becomes the question of how do we reconcile this? How do you consciously support this, in a country where I can stand up here at this podium and say pussy to y'all, like that's free speech, and that is great. But how, I think it brought up a lot of questions, like you were saying, of how we can support this in a way that keeps our privilege in check. So, open question to anybody, but Mark, this might be something that you can speak to, of just the disparity between how this case was perceived in the West and what, to your knowledge, what do people in Russia actually think about Pussy Riot?
Well, the whole notion of reception and perception of Pussy Riot both in Russia and in the West kind of bewilders me, because of what happened in terms of reception and perception here didn't follow any expected patterns. For instance, Russian, speaking of Russian artistic community, there was an immediate schism between some avant-garde and performance art and rock musicians who so supported Pussy Riot vehemently to a great extent, endangering themselves. The same goes to a number of prominent artists, writers, journalists, and film directors in Russia. And then there was a huge number of intelligentsia that displayed nothing but misunderstanding and hatred of Pussy Riot, phrasing it not necessarily the way Putinistas did, that they have to be punished with a jail term, but at least they have to be taken outside and have their pants taken down and publicly whipped, or there was a lot of talk of physical punishment, even metaphorically, which I and many of my colleagues find absolutely disgusting. And there was this almost sadistic, voyeuristic element, like this young women have to be physically, publicly punished. When you whip someone, you undress them. So there was this voyeuristic desire. Then there was, of course, the simple folk in the street that were very divided. Babushkas, they're the ones who whose religious perception could have been for real offended by Pussy Riot, forgave them. But there was lots of, nevertheless, public demagoguery about how offensive to religious spirit that performance was. To which, to my astonishment, I just found out today, American feminist establishment, personified to some degree by Camille Paglia, signed up to entirely speaking absurdities about how she empathizes with Russian believers that were offended by Pussy Riot. Excuse me, Camille. I mean, I don't know on what planet you exist. Yeah. Then what happened in the West? It also kind of flabbergasting, because there is no rhyme or reason except for the feminist punk community whom we expected to come to the Pussy Riot defense. I mean, there is Madonna, there is Sting, and then there are wild male philosophers like Bernard Levy and Slavoj Žižek, and then again Naomi Wolf and Camille Paglia are kind of absent. So I mean, it is very strange how Pussy Riot touch people on what levels and what. But very many, both in the West and in Russia, very many complained about Pussy Riot's lack of artistic value in their music. Well, if that was a good music, I would support them. But since this is this garbage, homemade DIY punk, I cannot support it, and I cannot lend my honorable name to the cause. Insane.
But luckily, we Americans have a lot of experience with sloppy DIY punk and have a sort of a grassroots infrastructure now of people, who will kind of come around a cause like this. And Blue, I know you've done some activist work related to this as well, because, Mark, you were speaking about more of the mainstream feminist and mainstream intelligentsia, even in America, not really coalescing around this issue, but I think that there was, as Amy was speaking to, a huge